Hello and welcome back, real estate agents. In this video series, we've been covering how to overcome the 3 biggest quality issues you typically have with leads. So if you're a real estate agent who's tired of wasting your entire marketing budget only to receive leads that have bad contact information, can't qualify for a Starbucks coffee, have another agent, or have no motivation at all, then this video is for you. In this video series, we've been talking about how to overcome those 3 biggest quality issues, meaning bad data, looky-loos and tire kickers, and people that already have other agents or that aren't your ideal clientele. And in the first video, we covered the bad data issue. And in this one, we're gonna be covering how to weed out all those pesky looky-loos and tire kickers that don't actually have any motivation of moving forward. So you can make the most of your time, money, and resources. So let's jump into it. The overarching action plan and goal to weed out the looky-loos and tire kickers is to simply add more friction. More friction is going to make these people jump through more hoops, and the more hoops they have to jump through, the less likely they are to be a looky-loo or a tire kicker, and they're actually proving their motivation to you. So knowing that's the case, there's a few things that you can do both on the front end before they actually become a lead, and then there's also some things that you can do on the back end once they've submitted their information to make sure that you're weeding out the looky-loos and the tire kickers. Let's talk about the front end first. The first thing that you can do is make sure you're properly leveraging high intent forms, these same high intent forms that we described in the last video. Now, again, in the last video, we talked about how to overcome the issue of bad data. So if you're still receiving bad names, bad phone numbers, bad emails, then go watch that video and then come back to this one. Now, you're good to go. You're receiving that real contact information. And again, the first thing that you want to do and that you can do is leverage those higher intent forms. Those higher intent forms are going to add more friction because it'll do one of 2 things. Either one, it'll autofill their information and add a review page where they have to manually confirm that it's the right name, phone number, and email that online platform auto-populated for them. Or what it'll do is rather than autofilling their data, it'll actually manually make them type in their name, phone number, and email. So either way, you're adding more friction, but it's a perfect thing to use to do on the upfront to generate more consistent folks that are proving their motivation to you. Now, the second step is using long forms or surveys. A long form is essentially a form that you're leveraging, just like we talked about in the last video. It could be high intent, but you're simply adding more questions to that form. So whether it's high intent or a high volume form, the whole goal here is to add more friction by asking more questions. So you can add extra questions. Instead of asking for your name, phone number, and email, you can ask for their name, phone number, email, their timeline for moving, their budget, if they already rent or own, so you know whether they may have a house to sell. All those type of questions that you can ask to make sure that you're adding more friction and at the same time gathering more information for yourself so it's easier to convert these people once they do submit their information. Now, one important thing to note here is that if you're adding these questions in, like you can see the example on your screen, you want to make sure you're staying away from sensitive topics, meaning you typically want to stay away from asking people about their credit score, their race, their gender, that type of stuff, because all of those are very sensitive topics with these online advertising platforms with Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, especially Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. They can be very strict. So knowing that's the case, you want to shy away from those type of questions, but generic questions like, when are you looking to move? Do you already rent or own? Are you a first-time home buyer? All of those type of questions are great questions to add more friction, weed out the looky-loos and tire kickers, and at the same time, give yourself more ammunition for converting those people once they fill out the form. The other thing that you can do is you can use a survey. So you can use a survey that's on a separate landing page. So instead of filling out a form that's native to the platform, meaning like a Facebook lead ad or an Instagram lead form, what you can do is send those people to a landing page on your website, and you can have a sales funnel where you could simply ask those same questions, except it would be on that landing page. No real different strategy there in terms of why it's on a landing page and why it's not. The whole point is just adding in extra questions that they have to fill out to add that extra friction and make them jump through the hoops while adding more ammunition for yourself to convert them later on. Now, I will say, if you're considering one of these options, I typically recommend, and we do this for all of our clients, that you go with the lead ads that are native to the platform rather than sending somebody to a landing page. It has nothing to do with the level of friction or the quality of the leads. It's more so the cost of the leads. All of these online platforms, the big guys like Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, they all want to incentivize people for staying on their platform because they're fighting over everyone's attention and everyone's eyeballs across the world. So knowing that's the case, they typically incentivize you with lower lead costs if you use the lead forms that are native for their platform, those high intent or low intent lead ads and lead forms that are already on their platform. If you're sending them to a landing page, because you're sending them outside of that to a different website, even if it's not a competitor, it could be your own website. The point is you're taking that person's attention, the lead's attention that is, off of that platform and taking it elsewhere, and they don't like that. So those leads typically cost more because of that. That's just how their algorithms work. So just keep that in mind. But again, a long form or survey can work either on the platform or off. It's up to you at the end of the day, but we usually recommend keeping it on the platform for the reasons I just mentioned. And the last thing that you can do to weed out the looky-loos and tire kickers is to use a multi-step funnel. Whether you want to call it a sales funnel, just the funnel, you can call it anything you like, but basically it's a landing page in which that person would submit one piece of information, kind of like the example you can see on the screen, whether that's simply just their email, and then it takes them to the next stage where they can fill out the rest of their information, and then from there they get the offer, or maybe in the seller's example here for seller leads, all they do is put in their email address, and then it takes them to the second stage, and then the second stage of the funnel on the second page will ask for their name, phone number, and email, all the extra details, and then they submit that information, and there's a thank you page that will tell them that they finally received the offer. So you can either use the first option we talked about, which is simply leveraging high intent forms, or you can go a step above and beyond by using a long form or survey, either on the platform or off on a landing page like we talked about. Or you can use this option here where instead of using a survey, you're making them go through multiple pages on a sales funnel to get to the end product. All of those options will add in those extra steps, those extra hoops that they need to jump through. So that covers our front end, but now let's jump into our back end options. There's 4 different things you can do on the back end to weed out these looky-loos and tire kickers. The first thing is actually something that we already talked about, and that is the surveys. So the further questions in the surveys that you can ask. And you can just simply put them in 2 places. You can either do that survey on the front end, like we already described, or what you could do rather is use it on the back end by simply using a high intent or a high volume form first, where all they submit is name, phone number, and email. And then you follow up with an automated text message or an automated email that'll then direct them to the survey. And then you can do the survey after they've submitted their information. So it does the same thing, but it's up to you whether you put it up front or you put it on the back end. Both ways are still adding the same amount of friction. It's just simply up to you how you would like to do it. I recommend split testing, see what works best for the campaigns that you're running, and then go with whatever's working the best. Now, the second and third option that you have on the back end are meant to do the same thing. It's just 2 different means of doing the same thing. The first is a chatbot, and chatbots are cool because they allow you to do a few things. One, they allow you to do the same type of filtration that you do with the survey, because you can simply use a normal high intent or high volume form that only asks for name, phone number, and email. But once they submit that information, it'll actually direct them to Facebook Messenger in this example, and it will send an automated message where then it will start asking them all those questions that would have otherwise been on your survey. So it does the same thing as the survey, but there are a couple advantages with the chatbot over the surveys, that is. The first thing is that it's a little more customizable, meaning if somebody answers a question that is not in line with your ideal clientele, let's say you ask them what their budget for their property is if they're a buyer, and you only work with people in the price point of $350,000 and above, or maybe it's $500,000 and above, then if they submit an answer that's below that, it'll kindly let them know that you can't help them at the time or you don't have anything available or any inventory in that price point. If they do, then it'll continue forward, but it'll ask them a different series of questions and they can continue through the normal process so they can get to the end result that you want. The other cool thing about the chatbots is that they can also have a lot higher engagement than the surveys as well, because you're asking the same questions, but because it's interactive and it'll send one message and the lead has to respond, and then it'll send another message like they're actually chatting with a real person, it can increase your engagement and actually make sure you have a higher likelihood of the people actually going all the way through the survey and answering more questions, rather than going through a blank survey and just getting bored of clicking through, not knowing how many questions are left. Rather, it keeps them engaged because it's almost as if they're talking to a real person. So just something to keep in mind. And then your third option is using a if this, then that type software. What that means in like the computer science world is that if somebody submits information or answers a question or submits an answer to a form, depending on what that answer is, if the answer is this, then this happens. If their answer was this, then that happens. So it kind of does what the chatbot does. Again, if let's say somebody submitted and they said their budget was $100,000, and that's not something that you can work with, especially in the state of the current market that we're in here in the United States, then it would say that if they answered $100,000 or less, then send them this different message. If they answered above $100,000, then send them this message. So it can take the people in two different directions. And if those people answer questions and there's somebody who's a looky-loo or a tire kicker, let's say in a sense that they say they were just looking, if you ask what their timeline is and they say 3 months or less, you have 6 months or less, maybe it's 9-month timeline, 12-month, and you also give them the option to choose just looking. If you're not looking to work with somebody that's 9 months, 12 months, or just looking, that's a looky-loo and a tire kicker, then if they submit the answer to that question, then you can make sure you send them a particular email or message. So again, you can either do that with the chatbot, or with this option, you can use a if this, then that software. So there are softwares out there that do that, such as Zapier, that's one. Zapier, a great website to use for automations for your CRM, and it will allow you to do these if this, then that programmings to send out different text messages, emails, and automations. Or it may be built into your current CRM that you have. And the example that you can see here on your screen is actually an example from our CRM and what we provide from our software for our clients so that they can do this same type of thing. So for instance, in this example, if somebody's timeline, you asked what their timeline was, and if their timeline was under 3 months and that answer to that question was yes, then you would send them one particular text or email that had different messaging. Then if they said no, their timeline is not under 3 months, and then you could send them a different series of text messages and emails. And last but not least, your last form and most thorough form of defense in weeding out looky-loos and tire kickers is leveraging a human being. Those chatbots and those if this, then that softwares are great, but at the end of the day, they are AI. They're artificial intelligence, and they're simply code. Nobody's gonna have quite as good of a conversation with a human being as much as another human being will. So knowing that's the case, you can leverage an inside sales agent, is what they're often called in the real estate space. And that human being is that person who can call, text, and email these leads for you 7 days a week. They can filter out the looky-loos and the tire kickers. And the great part about this is not only can they have higher engagement because they are a human being, so the quality of conversation will be better and in more depth, but you can also ask more questions on the phone as a human being than you may be able to put on those forms due to the restrictions that we talked about earlier in this video, meaning some of those online platforms won't let you ask certain questions on those forms because of the rules and regulations of those platforms, such as credit score and other things like that. So knowing that's the case, if you're leveraging a human being, they can ask those further questions after you use the form that doesn't have those questions. They can give people a ring and dive into the situation a little bit deeper, find more about those individuals, pull out the gems, and weed out those looky-loos and tire kickers. And there you have it. There are the 7 or 8 different tools that you have at your disposal to make sure that you're weeding out those pesky looky-loos and tire kickers. Now you can go with one of these 7 or 8 options, or you can do what we do for our clients and stack several of those options on top of each other so you can get the highest quality opportunity on the phone that you possibly can. Now, if you're doing that for yourself and you're stacking up different options, just make sure as you're testing those filtration stacks that you're split testing them against one another so you can find out what actually works best for you, your needs, and your marketplace. If you found the information in this video helpful, make sure you stay tuned to the next video, because in the first one we talked about how to overcome bad data. Now we just figured out how to weed out the looky-loos and tire kickers. And in the next video, we're gonna be talking about how to put the nail in the coffin and make sure every single lead that gets on the phone with you does not have another real estate agent already. They meet your minimum budget requirements in terms of the leads that you work with, and they actually fit your ideal demographic for the clients you typically work with. Now, if you found this video helpful and you want to watch that video, make sure you click the like button here, click the subscribe button, and ring that notification bell to stay tuned to the next video and all of the future ones on our channel. And as always, thank you for watching.